Hey y'all, this gorgeous case is the Fractal Design North. I'm used to small things in my hands, so I designed a similar case aimed at ITX using full-size GPUs. I shrunk the design down as far as I could for 3D printing, and it was a serious case of shrinkage in all dimensions. Until Fractal Design makes an ITX version of the North, I'll show you how to 3D print your own using files I'll be sharing in the description. Some parts are over 300mm long, so I used my Shady Tech X Max 3. The filament used here is ABS impregnated with glass fibers. The whole case is less than half a roll of filament, and it took about 10 hours to print everything. The mesh effect is done by not printing the top and bottom layers. Unless you have the same printer, print times won't mean much. Here you can see my old X1 would take almost 3 times longer on just one part. I used the X1 for some feed action since it's been a while. I used the stock filament profile for ABS impregnated with glass fibers, but this brand or color needs some tweaking since it performed worse than previous. You'll see later that I had some layer adhesion issues that you can see in the mesh, but it still performed quite well and I love the color. And this was probably the most satisfying support removal I've ever seen. I hope you like filling holes because this case uses a lot of heat inserts, 30 M.25 for the panels and 4 6x32 for the motherboard. In my quest for shrinkage, I didn't leave much room for joinery while also keeping the case strong, so it gets screwed a bunch of times as a result. Let me know how you would optimize the case for less screwing. In the past, I've penetrated my 3D prints with magnets by melting, epoxy, friction, and this time I'm just using simple white glue. I did some tests using print in place, but it doesn't work if you have a hardened steel nozzle. But despite how simple white glue is, if you let it dry completely, it works just fine. And who am I to pass up an opportunity of filling up a bunch of eager holes with white goop? Oh, and make sure you have your polarity correct. Like some Brigham Young University students, I use a sneaky little trick called soaking. Vinegar and steel wool, when left soaking in your dorm room, will create a liquid that you can use to wet stain your wood. Here you can see that vinegar can dissolve an entire steel wool pad in just a few days. What we're left with is a solution that can darken many wood varieties, and some can even turn black in color. I'm using these cheap bamboo slapping sticks I found on Amazon. I'm using this 1-inch paintbrush, but you can also soak it in a shallow pan or any means to wet your wood. Fractal Design uses high-end wood to adorn their cases, and by staining these sticks, I hope I can bring some likeness to the original. The staining won't be instant, so just focus on getting the entire shaft wet for now. The next day, I was really bummed to find my new sweater ruined from a little splashing of solution. Even bleaching it didn't help, so please be careful. But you can see how different the bamboo looks after the stain dried. You can cut the tips of your wood any way you like. Here I'm just using some strong shears to operate on my wood. The wood I'm using has been dimensioned from the factory, and I just designed some tapered slits on the front bezel for your wood to squeeze into. While editing this video, I noticed I could have probably used more shafts of wood for tighter spacing. What do you think? My original intention was to provide the best airflow to the radiator, but looking at it now, it could probably use more wood inside without hurting thermals. Yet, I think it still looks pretty good. With the arts and crafts done, it was finally time to put a PC together. In this build, we'll use an AMD 5800X 3D CPU. I totally regret not buying NVMe drives when they were so cheap. 256GB is not enough. Using alcohol, don't forget to rub out your CPU. Your AIO base plate might get jealous if you don't rub it out as well. When you're laying down your goop, do you spread it around or just let it pool? Let me know in the comments. I'm installing my AIO outside of the case since it might be easier this way. And during test fitting, I had my Noctua NHL9A installed, which ran pretty good, so air cooling could technically work in this case too. I'm going to be using 32GB of RAM in this build so that I can play some Cyberpunk. My old B450 board doesn't have its I/O shield built in, so that's the first thing to install. The top 90mm fan is optional, but it goes on next. I'm using a splitter to control and power the radiator fan and case fan at once. Slide your 60mm power button through, you don't have to be gentle for this hole. And now's your chance to show the world, or your ex, your finger tightening game. Normally I like my feet sticky, but this time I'll be screwing my feet in. I'll be sharing two sizes of feet depending on how power hungry your GPU is. The taller feet reduce my temperatures by 4 degrees Celsius. And now we'll start screwing the case panels together. According to a comment in one of my videos, apparently you aren't a man if you use an electric screwdriver. Woe is me, I suppose. But sometimes you need help when you have a lot of screwing to do. What do you think of that? While I was going to town on these holes, I wondered how strong these butt joints would be if I used acetone to fuse the panels together. Have you done anything like that? If you have, I'd love to hear about it. If you want to see a video to test if the panels would hold up using acetone, let me know. My shrinkage goal caused some unneeded complexity for the front portion, and adding just 10mm of height to the case would have solved it. Sunk cost fallacy is real, my friends. Again, the installation process became a victim to shrinkage since you need to flex the top panel for the rest of the install. With most of the exterior done, it was time to get elbows deep in this build. I made the mistake of forgetting to install the CPU power cable before placing the motherboard in the case. Brace yourself for more blunders to come. Here I had to use a tiny screwdriver to get one of the motherboard screws in. Things are tight in this little case. Try to get as many cables plugged in while you still can, it's only going to get tighter. More blunders en route. The previous revision of this front panel allowed for an easy GPU install. This sturdy revision did not. Luckily, my unmanly electric screwdriver makes panel removal and install easier. The GPU bracket plate will help secure the GPU in place. For peak shrinkage, I'm using these PCIe power adapters so I can keep the case width as narrow as possible while avoiding the use of a riser cable for a sandwich configuration. The width of the radiator would still be a limiting factor in case width, so going with a riser cable would not have helped much. Plus, riser cables love going out of stock. I made some custom cables for this build again, and I'll share the measurements down below. This is how the power cables for the RTX 3080 go in. Now, if you decide to use these adapters, I can't be held responsible if your house burns down and people get injured. Use them at your own risk. I have a solid life insurance policy. Forgetting the risks, look at how low profile they are. With some of the blunders out of the way, I can finally secure the radiator. Originally I was going to use a 92mm AIO in this build, but I'm glad to go bigger. The SFX power supply gets screwed next, and you can go with an SFX-L unit too. I'd still recommend normal SFX, since the L version would put more leverage on the case. You could probably get away with just the stock cables, but it would restrict airflow for the radiator and create a real rat's nest in the build. But again, it is possible. And no one can deny how easy and satisfying it is to build in a case with custom cables. Do you have custom cables in your case? Let me know. I could probably use some cable combs or even zip ties to bring the cable management up a notch, but I'm honestly happy with how they're routed as is. They're pretty neat, right? This is the last blunder, I swear. To slide in the side panel, you have to position it so that the PSU support clears the PCIe power adapters, then lift the top panel onto the rails, then slide it in. After that, you can then screw in the top panel. This last screw is actually optional, but it helps keep the side panel in place. Who likes stubby Wi-Fi antennas? I dig them. And finally, just snap on the front grille and we are done building this thing. I kept all the settings for voltage and frequency at default for this test, and I think it helps offset the low ambient temperature of my garage. Normally for builds this small, I undervolt and limit my hardware, so I feel comfortable sharing these results with y'all. The AMD 5800X3D is happy enough with the 120mm AIO running Cinebench, and the RTX 3080 doesn't thermal throttle while playing Cyberpunk. So I'm quite happy with the temperatures despite the size of the case. Overall, I'm quite happy with how this project turned out. And I'm really curious if you think Fractal Design should release an ITX version of the North. It likely won't be as small as this build, since they would probably want greater GPU compatibility. But I still think it would be really cool and give consumers another option besides their Terra line. Despite the blunders, I had a lot of fun with this project, and I hope you at least learned something new. or you get inspired to create your own projects, and maybe even had some laughs along the way. If you like this video, you can really help this channel out by giving it a thumbs up and subscribing if you haven't yet. I love answering your questions and reading your feedback, so please don't hesitate to comment below too. And remember to share the video with people or groups that might like it. Since you made it this far, I want to give you my thanks for taking the time to check out my work. Your attention is precious and it means a lot. The next project is already in motion, so stay tuned, y'all.